My father-in-law changed his will the day before he died, and now I understand why everyone tried to keep me away from the reading. For 8 years, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Dead last. My husband's relatives made it crystal clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for their precious boy. They had wanted him to marry his college sweetheart, a surgeon's daughter with the right bloodline and bank account. Instead, he chose me, a bartender from the wrong side of town who wore thrift store dresses to their charity galas. At family dinners, my mother-in-law would seat me at the kids' table with my husband's teenage cousins. During holidays, I got the broken chair that wobbled and the smallest portion of everything. When I tried to contribute to conversations about current events or books I'd read, they'd change the subject or talk over me like I hadn't spoken. When I miscarried our first pregnancy at 12 weeks, my sister-in-law actually said, "Maybe it's for the best. Some people aren't meant to be mothers." She said it while filing her nails, not even looking up. My husband defended me when he was around, but his job in medical device sales required constant travel. 3 weeks out of every month, I endured family events alone, smiling through their passive-aggressive comments and outright insults. For my birthday one year, my mother-in-law gave me a gift certificate for etiquette classes. The card read, "Every woman can benefit from refinement." My husband was mortified when he found out, but the damage was done. The breaking point should have been the Christmas when my brother-in-law's wife asked me to serve drinks and clean up after dinner because, as she put it, I was used to that kind of work. But I swallowed my pride and did it, desperate to keep peace for my husband's sake. Another time, at my sister-in-law's birthday party, I brought a homemade cake I'd spent hours decorating. My mother-in-law took one look at it and said, "Oh, how sweet." Store-bought would have been fine, though. She then served a professional cake she'd ordered, leaving mine untouched on the counter all evening. When I graduated from community college with my business degree, earning a 3.9 GPA while working full-time, not one family member attended the ceremony. My mother-in-law claimed she had a migraine, but I saw her Instagram photos from a spa day that same afternoon. The worst incident happened at a family barbecue when I was 26. I was wearing a sundress I'd bought for the occasion, nothing inappropriate, just a simple floral print. My brother-in-law's wife loudly announced to everyone that some people dress like they're still working the late shift. The entire gathering went quiet. My husband was inside getting drinks and missed it, but 30 people heard her humiliate me. I excused myself and cried in their bathroom for 20 minutes. When I came out, my father-in-law was waiting in the hallway. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded and forced a smile, but he didn't buy it. That was the first time I saw something like sympathy in his eyes. Then my father-in-law got sick. Terminal pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live. The family rallied around him like protective wolves, but they made sure I knew my place. When I offered to help with his care, coordinate doctor appointments, or even just bring meals, my mother-in-law snapped, "We'll handle our own family matters. You wouldn't understand the complexities." But Theodore, my father-in-law, started asking for me specifically, not just during family visits, but private conversations that made everyone else uncomfortable. The last month before he died, things got weird. My father-in-law started asking to see me privately. He'd call when my husband wasn't home, wanting to talk about my childhood, my parents who died when I was 19, my life before marriage. I thought he was finally trying to get to know me before he passed, maybe feeling guilty about how his family treated me. During one of these conversations, he asked about my mother. What was she like? He wanted to know. What did she teach you about standing up for yourself? I told him my mother had been a nurse who worked double shifts to support us after Dad died in a construction accident when I was 15. She taught me that dignity wasn't something others could give or take away, that it came from within, that sometimes you have to endure unfair treatment with grace, but you never have to accept that you deserve it. He nodded slowly, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. Like mother. Like daughter, I suspect. Another time, he asked about my work at the restaurant where I'd met his son. Did you enjoy it? He wanted to know. I explained that I'd actually loved bartending. I was good at reading people, making them feel welcome, creating a space where everyone felt valued regardless of their background. The job had taught me patience and how to diffuse tension. He smiled at that. Those are valuable skills, especially in families. My husband's family was furious about these private conversations. They whispered in corners during family gatherings, shot me dirty looks across dinner tables, and my brother-in-law actually pulled my husband aside to warn him I was taking advantage of a dying man's confusion. But my father-in-law wasn't confused. If anything, he seemed more lucid than ever, asking pointed questions about my value, my dreams, what I'd do if I had unlimited resources to help others. One afternoon, he called me over while the rest of the family was arguing about his care plan in the kitchen. "I've been watching you for 8 years, he said quietly. "Watching how you handle their treatment, how you never fight back or cause scenes. That takes strength most people don't have." I didn't know how to respond to that. He continued, "I also see how you light up when you talk about the literacy program you volunteer for, or how you slip money to families at the restaurant when their cards get declined. You think nobody notices, but I do. How did you know about that?" I asked, shocked. He smiled weakly. "I know more than people realize. I know you've been putting yourself through business school. I know you send money to your aunt every month even though it means you wear the same 3 dresses to every family event. I know you've never asked my son for anything beyond basic respect from his family." I felt tears threatening to spill. Nobody had ever acknowledged those things before. "They think you're after money," he said, coughing slightly. "But I've never seen you show interest in what we have. You work 2 jobs when you could easily convince my son to support you. You drive a 15-year-old car when you could ask for something better. You're not a gold digger. You're just a good person who ended up in a family that doesn't recognize good people." That conversation haunted me for days. Theodore was dying, and instead of focusing on his family legacy or business concerns, he was thinking about how I'd been treated. The next week, he asked to see me alone again. This time, he was more serious. I need to ask you something and I want an honest answer, he said. If you had the power to change how this family operates, how would you use it? I thought carefully before answering. I'd want everyone to feel valued, I said. I'd want decisions to be made based on what's best for everyone, not just what protects certain people's feelings or positions, even if it meant revealing uncomfortable truths. Especially then, I replied. Lies protect the wrong people and hurt the innocent ones. He nodded approvingly. That's what I hoped you'd say. When my father-in-law passed on a Tuesday morning, they planned the entire funeral without consulting me. I found out the time and location from a neighbor who'd seen the obituary. At the service, they seated me 3 rows back while his golf buddies and business associates got front row seats. I watched my husband deliver a beautiful eulogy about the man who raised him, and I cried for the loss of the only family member who'd shown me kindness in his final weeks. After the service, as people were sharing memories, Theodore's longtime foreman approached me. Mr. Theodore talked about you a lot these past months, he said quietly. Said you were the only one who understood what really mattered. He wanted you to know he saw your worth, even if others didn't. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. My husband assumed I wouldn't be invited since I wasn't blood family, but the lawyer specifically requested my presence. When my mother-in-law heard this, her face went completely white and she had to sit down. That's when they started their desperate campaign to keep me away from that appointment. First, my sister-in-law called with a fake family emergency. Her daughter had supposedly broken her arm at school and needed someone to watch her other kids while she went to the hospital. But when I offered to meet her at the emergency room to help, she quickly said they had it handled and hung up. The story fell apart when I saw her daughter posting Instagram photos from cheerleading practice that same afternoon. Next, my brother-in-law showed up at our door with brochures for a luxury spa weekend. His treat, he said, looking nervous and sweating despite the cool weather. You've been through so much stress with Dad's illness, you deserve a break. The spa was 3 states away and the weekend happened to include Friday. When I politely declined, saying I wanted to be there for the will reading out of respect for my father-in-law, his expression darkened. Dad wouldn't have wanted you to worry about boring legal stuff, he said. You should focus on healing. But the most disturbing attempt came from my mother-in-law herself. She showed up at my door Thursday evening with tears streaming down her face, clutching my hands like we were long-lost sisters. Please, she begged, her voice breaking, don't come tomorrow. I know we haven't always gotten along, but I'm asking you as one woman to another, stay home, for everyone's sake. When I asked why, she just kept repeating that some things were better left alone, that the family had been through enough pain already. Her desperation was palpable. This woman who'd treated me like dirt for 8 years was literally begging me to miss a simple legal proceeding. Something was very, very wrong. These people who'd treated me like garbage for 8 years were suddenly desperate to keep me away from a simple will reading. The more they pushed, the more determined I became to attend. That night, I barely slept. My husband was confused by his family's behavior, but assumed they were just processing grief differently. He had no idea what was really happening. I spent hours wondering what could possibly be in Theodore's will that would cause such panic. Maybe he'd left me something embarrassing to his family, like a small bequest that would highlight how little they'd included me. Maybe there were debts they didn't want me to know about. I never imagined the truth. Friday morning, I woke up violently ill. Nausea, vomiting, dizziness so severe I could barely stand. Food poisoning, I thought, until I remembered my mother-in-law insisting on making me dinner the night before as an apology for years of mistreatment. She'd arrived with grocery bags, claiming she wanted to prepare my favorite meal as a gesture of goodwill. She'd been alone in my kitchen for nearly an hour, claiming she was preparing something special. I'd been so touched by the apparent gesture that I hadn't paid attention to what she was actually doing. When I went to get antacids from my medicine cabinet, I found an empty bottle of Ipecac syrup in the trash can, the same medication used in hospitals to induce vomiting in poison cases. My mother-in-law had been in my bathroom that evening, supposedly looking for aspirin for a headache. They weren't just trying to convince me to stay away from the will reading. They were actively trying to poison me. I called my husband, who was already at work, and told him I was sick. He offered to come home, but I insisted he go ahead to the lawyer's office and represent both of us. But the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. Someone had tried to drug me to keep me away from this meeting. That wasn't grief or family drama. That was criminal behavior. I forced myself to shower, drink fluids, and get dressed. Then I drove to the lawyer's office anyway, dizzy and nauseous but more determined than ever to understand what they were hiding. The waiting room was packed with my husband's entire extended family, plus several people I didn't recognize. They all stared at me like I was a ghost walking among the living. My mother-in-law looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking as she clutched her purse. When she saw me walk in, she actually gasped. You should be home resting, she said quickly. You said you were sick. I am sick, I replied, taking a seat, but I'm here anyway. The lawyer, an elderly man named Peterson with kind eyes and silver hair, called us into his conference room. He seemed nervous as he shuffled through a thick stack of papers, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like sympathy. Before we begin, he said, clearing his throat, I need to mention that your father made significant changes to his will just 24 hours before his passing. He was very specific about wanting certain parties present today, and he left detailed instructions about how this information should be shared. My mother-in-law gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. My sister-in-law kept glancing between me and the door like she wanted to run. Peterson began reading the standard legal language, then moved to the bequests. Small amounts to various charities my father-in-law had supported. A few $1,000s each to longtime employees of his construction company. $10,000 to the foreman who'd spoken to me at the funeral. Then he got to the family portions. To my son, he leaves the family business, including all construction contracts and equipment, representing approximately 40% of the total estate value. My husband squeezed my hand. We'd expected this. He'd been working in the business part-time for years, learning the operations. To my daughter, He leaves the family home and associated investment properties, representing approximately 30% of the estate value. My sister-in-law smiled smugly, already mentally redecorating the sprawling colonial where she'd grown up. Peterson paused here, looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't read. To my daughter-in-law, he continued, his voice careful and measured. He leaves the vacation property in Colorado, the art collection valued at approximately $800,000, all liquid assets including savings and investment accounts totaling approximately $2.3 million, and the contents of Safety Deposit Box 847 at First National Bank, along with all documentation contained therein. This bequest represents approximately 30% of the estate value. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I sat there stunned, my mouth literally hanging open. $2.3 million, plus property and art. I had never heard of any safety deposit box, and judging by my husband's confused expression, neither had he. But my mother-in-law looked like she was having a heart attack. There's been some mistake, my brother-in-law said, his voice cracking as he stood up abruptly. Dad was clearly not in his right mind at the end. The medication, the pain, the confusion. We need to contest this immediately. Peterson shook his head firmly. I can assure you, your father was completely lucid when he made these changes. We met for over 3 hours 2 days before his passing, and I was required by law to assess his mental capacity. He was sharp as ever, perhaps more focused than I'd ever seen him. He spent considerable time ensuring these instructions were legally sound and couldn't be contested. My sister-in-law was practically hyperventilating. This is insane. Why would he leave anything to her? She's not even blood family. She's nobody. Perhaps, Peterson said quietly, looking around the room with disapproval. You should ask yourselves why he felt the need to make such provisions. The tension in the room was suffocating. My husband looked bewildered, caught between loyalty to me and confusion about his father's decision. But his mother and siblings looked terrified, not just surprised or upset, but genuinely scared. What's in the safety deposit box? My husband asked, his voice tight with confusion. Peterson handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my father-in-law's distinctive handwriting. Your father left specific instructions that only you could open this, he said to me. He also specified that you should visit the safety deposit box alone, at least initially. Why alone? My husband asked, sounding hurt. Peterson consulted his notes. He said, and I quote, she needs to understand the full scope of what she's inheriting before deciding how much to share with others. My mother-in-law made a choking sound. After the meeting, several family members tried to corner me in the parking lot. My brother-in-law grabbed my arm as I walked to my car. Look, he said, his grip tight enough to bruise. Whatever Dad left you, we can work something out. You don't need all that money. You can live comfortably on much less. Let go of me, I said firmly. My sister-in-law joined him. We're family, she said, her voice wheedling. We should share everything equally. Dad wasn't thinking clearly, but it was my mother-in-law's reaction that convinced me something much bigger was happening. She stood apart from the others, staring at me with pure terror in her eyes. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside the bank, holding the envelope with trembling hands. Whatever was inside had the power to terrify people who'd never shown fear of anything. People who'd felt entitled to treat me like garbage for 8 years were now desperately afraid of what I might learn. The letter was written in my father-in-law's careful script. My dear daughter-in-law, if you're reading this, then my family tried to keep you away from this reading, just as I predicted they would. They probably made excuses, offered bribes, maybe even tried more desperate measures. They're scared, and they should be. For 8 years, I watched them treat you like an outsider, like someone beneath their notice. I let them because I was a coward, more concerned with family peace than family justice. But in my final weeks, when you showed me more genuine kindness than my own blood relatives had in months, I realized something important. You're not the problem in this family. You never were. Go to the safety deposit box, but be careful who you tell about what you find there. Trust no one in this room except your husband, and even then, think carefully about how much he can handle learning about the people who raised him. The truth has been buried for 30 years, but it's time someone with integrity had the power to decide what happens next. You deserve to know why they really hate you, and it has nothing to do with your background or your worth as a person. What you'll find will give you choices. Use them wisely. Your father-in-law, Theodore Bai, drove to First National Bank with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The bank manager, who'd known Theodore for decades, personally escorted me to the safety deposit box area. He was a good man, she said as she inserted her key alongside mine. Whatever he left you, he meant for you to have it. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, almost like a small file drawer. Inside were manila folders organized with the meticulous care Theodore had brought to his construction business. Each folder was labeled and dated, containing documents that went back decades. The first folder was labeled Family Medical History and contained records I'd never seen before. My mother-in-law's medical files from 1995, including detailed notes about a radical hysterectomy performed due to complications from advanced cervical cancer. The surgical report was explicit: complete removal of reproductive organs due to aggressive cancer spread. The oncologist's notes mentioned that the patient had been informed she would never be able to carry children naturally. The operation was performed in March 1995. My mother-in-law had been physically unable to have children since 1995, but my husband was born in April 1997. The second folder contained private investigator reports from 1996 and 1997. Theodore had hired a professional surveillance company to document his wife's activities during that period. The photographs were damning. My mother-in-law entering motels with different men on various dates, long embraces in parking lots, intimate dinners at restaurants across town where she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. The investigators had been thorough. They'd documented times, locations, license plate numbers, and even obtained receipts from hotels and restaurants. My mother-in-law had been having multiple affairs throughout 1996, and early 1997. The final photograph in the series showed her with a man I didn't recognize, but the investigator's report identified him as Detective Raymond Torino of the County Police Department. The photos of them together were dated throughout 1996, with the last one taken in January 1997, just 3 months before my husband's birth. The third folder contained the bombshell that explained everything: a DNA test from 1998, comparing Theodore's genetic material to my husband's. 0% probability of paternal relationship. My husband wasn't Theodore's biological son, but Theodore had known this for over 20 years and had never said a word. The fourth folder explained why this discovery was so significant financially. Theodore's construction empire was worth over $15 million, built over 40 years of careful investments and smart business decisions. His original will had always left the bulk of his estate to his son, but if my husband wasn't actually his biological child, then legally, the inheritance should go to Theodore's next of kin. Since Theodore had no siblings and his parents were deceased, that would normally be his wife. Except my mother-in-law had committed fraud by allowing everyone to believe my husband was Theodore's son for over 20 years. She'd signed legal documents, insurance forms, and inheritance papers under false pretenses. In cases of inheritance fraud, the assets would be distributed according to the deceased's clearly expressed final wishes, rather than default legal relationships. Theodore had chosen me. The fifth folder contained evidence of systematic embezzlement that made my stomach turn. My mother-in-law had been stealing from the family construction business for over a decade, using her access to accounting records and her position as Theodore's wife to cover her tracks. She'd invented fake suppliers and submitted invoices for materials that were never delivered. She'd created fictional subcontractor payments and pocketed the money. She'd blamed losses on economic downturns, material cost increases, and seasonal fluctuations, but the evidence showed she'd systematically siphoned nearly $3 million over 12 years. Theodore had discovered the theft 6 months before his death and had been quietly documenting everything. The sixth folder was the most disturbing of all. It contained documented evidence that Detective Torino, my husband's biological father, had been feeding my mother-in-law confidential information about ongoing police investigations. She'd used that information to tip off certain business associates, allowing them to avoid arrests and keep their illegal operations running. Drug dealers had been warned about upcoming raids. Human traffickers had moved their operations just hours before police arrived. Violent felons had fled town with advance notice of warrants being issued. My father-in-law had discovered that his wife was not only an adulteress and embezzler, but also an accessory to police corruption that had let dangerous criminals escape justice. People had been hurt, maybe killed, because crimes had gone unpunished due to advance warning. The seventh folder contained financial records showing exactly how my mother-in-law had used her stolen money. Expensive vacations to Europe that she'd claimed were business trips for the construction company. Designer jewelry worth hundreds of thousands that she'd said were gifts from grateful clients. A secret investment account in the Cayman Islands containing over $2 million. She'd been living a completely double life, funded by theft and corruption. The eighth folder contained correspondence between Theodore and various law enforcement agencies. He'd been building a case against his wife in Torino for months, working with FBI agents who specialized in police corruption cases. He'd had enough evidence to send both of them to federal prison for decades, but he'd never acted on it. The ninth folder explained why. It contained letters Theodore had written but never sent, documenting his internal struggle between justice and protecting the young man he'd raised as his son. I can't destroy the boy's world just to punish her. One letter read, "He calls me dad. He loves me. He has no idea his entire identity is built on lies. If I expose this, I don't just destroy her, I destroy him too." But another letter, written just weeks before his death, showed his thinking had evolved. She's gotten worse. The embezzlement is accelerating. The tips to criminals are getting more frequent and more serious. People are getting hurt because of her actions. I can't let this continue just to protect one person's feelings, even if that person is the boy I love. The final folder contained a letter addressed specifically to me. By now, you understand why they tried so desperately to keep you away from this reading. My wife knows I discovered her secrets, but she doesn't know how much evidence I've gathered or what I plan to do with it. She's been living in terror for months, wondering if I'd expose everything before I died. She probably assumed I'd take her secrets to the grave, just like I've kept quiet about the paternity issue for over 20 years. But I couldn't let them continue treating you as less than family when you've shown me more genuine care in my final weeks than my blood relatives have in years. You held my hand during chemotherapy appointments when they were too busy with their own lives. You brought me homemade soup when they sent store-bought flowers with their names on cards. You listened to my stories about building the business when they only wanted to discuss their inheritance. More importantly, you've shown me who you really are when you thought nobody was watching. I know about the money you slip to struggling families at the restaurant. I know about the literacy program where you volunteer every Saturday morning. I know about the elderly neighbor whose groceries you buy when her social security runs short. You're not the gold digger they've painted you as. You're not the social climber they've accused you of being. You're simply a good person who happened to marry into a family that doesn't recognize good people. You have several choices now. You can expose everything and claim what's legally and morally yours. You can use this information to demand better treatment while keeping the family secrets. You can walk away from all of it and start fresh somewhere else with the resources I've left you. Whatever you decide, know that someone finally recognized your worth. The business is profitable and well-run despite my wife's theft. The properties are valuable and will only increase in worth. You could build something meaningful with these resources, something that honors the values I've seen you demonstrate. But remember this, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. Don't become like them in your quest for justice. Use this opportunity to be the person I believe you are. Your father-in-law, Theodore P.S. There's one more thing in the safety deposit box that I want you to see before you make any decisions. I reached deeper into the box and found a smaller envelope containing photographs. They were pictures of me that I'd never seen before, taken with a long lens camera over the past several months. There was one of me at the hospital during Theodore's chemotherapy, holding his hand while he slept. Another of me at the grocery store, quietly paying for an elderly woman's prescription when her card was declined. One of me at the literacy center, working with adult students on a Saturday morning. Another showing me leaving bags of groceries on a neighbor's doorstep. Theodore had been having me followed, not to spy on me, but to document who I really was when I thought nobody was watching. The last photograph showed me at his funeral, sitting alone in the third row while his family occupied the front, crying genuine tears for a man who'd finally seen my worth. On the back of that photo, Theodore had written, "This is the face of someone who deserves better than what she's received." I sat in the bank's private room for over an hour, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. My entire marriage had been built on lies. My husband had no idea who his real father was, or that the man who raised him had known the truth for decades. My mother-in-law had been living a triple life as adulteress, embezzler, and accessory to serious crimes that had hurt innocent people. And now I held the power to destroy them all, or to forge a completely different path. The bank manager knocked gently on the door. "Take all the time you need," she said. "Mr. Theodore left instructions that this room is yours for as long as you need it today." When I finally got home that evening, my husband was waiting with a concerned expression and a glass of wine. "How did it go?" he asked. "What was in the safety deposit box?" I looked at this man I'd loved for 8 years. The man who defended me against his family's cruelty whenever he was around. The man who had no idea his entire identity was built on deception. "Just some old business documents," I said carefully. "Your father wanted me to understand the family finances better." That seemed to satisfy him for the moment, but I could see questions forming in his mind. He was a smart man, and he'd start putting pieces together eventually. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, holding copies of everything I'd made at the bank before leaving. I could call lawyers in the morning, start proceedings that would unravel decades of fraud and corruption. I could claim the inheritance that was legally mine and watch my husband's family lose everything they'd built on lies. Or I could find a third option, something Theodore might not have considered when he'd planned this revelation. The next morning, my mother-in-law called before I'd even finished my coffee. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "I was wondering if we could meet," she said, "to talk about the will reading, about whatever Dad left you." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the terror of someone whose darkest secrets might be exposed at any moment. "Of course," I said calmly. "Let's talk." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would feel completely comfortable. I arrived early and chose a corner table where we could speak privately, but where I'd feel safe if the conversation went badly. My mother-in-law looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands, the kind of hollow expression people get when they're living with unbearable stress. She'd always been impeccably groomed, but today her hair was unkempt and her clothes wrinkled. "What did Theodore leave you?" she asked without preamble, her voice barely above a whisper. I studied her face, this woman who had made my life miserable for 8 years, who had tried to poison me to keep me away from the truth. "He left me some documents," I said carefully, "about family history, about things that happened before I joined the family." Her face went pale. "What kind of things?" "The kind that explain why you never wanted me to feel like part of the family," I replied. "The kind that show why you were so desperate to keep me away from that will reading. The kind that explain why you tried to drug me Friday morning." She started to cry then, right there in the coffee shop, sobbing into her hands like a woman facing the electric chair. Other customers stared, but she was beyond caring about appearances. "Please," she whispered through her tears. "You don't understand how it happened. I never meant for it to go this far." "Then explain it to me," I said, leaning forward. "Tell me everything, and maybe I'll understand." Through her tears and between sips of coffee she couldn't keep steady, she confessed the whole story. The affair with Detective Torino had started as revenge against Theodore's workaholism, just a fling that was supposed to make her feel desired again after years of feeling ignored. "Theodore was building the business," she said, her voice breaking. "He worked 16-hour days, traveled constantly, came home exhausted and distracted. I felt like I didn't exist in my own marriage. When she discovered she was pregnant with Torino's child, she panicked. Theodore had been trying to get her pregnant for years, not knowing about the hysterectomy complications that had made it impossible. I couldn't tell him about the surgery, she explained. He wanted children so desperately. I was afraid he'd leave me if he knew I could never give him a family. So when she got pregnant through the affair, she saw it as a solution. Theodore would have the son he'd always wanted, and no one would need to know the truth. When the baby came, Theodore was so thrilled to have a son that he never questioned the timing or genetics. He poured all his love into raising the boy, never suspecting the truth, but the lies required more lies to maintain them. The embezzlement started small, she explained. Just money to cover expenses related to keeping her secret, private doctor visits she couldn't put on insurance, payments to ensure certain medical records stayed buried, money to keep Torino quiet when he started demanding support for his biological son. But once she started stealing, it became easier to justify larger amounts. Designer clothes to maintain her image, vacations to escape the stress of living a lie. Eventually, she was taking money simply because she could. The police corruption was Torino's idea, she continued. He knew about the construction business through her, knew which contractors might be willing to pay for advance warning about safety investigations or permit problems. What started as a few tips about minor building code violations grew into something much more serious. Torino began using his position to help genuinely dangerous criminals, and my mother-in-law became his accomplice by passing along information and laundering money through the construction business. Theodore found out about everything 6 months ago, she said, her voice breaking completely. He hired investigators, gathered evidence, documented every crime I'd committed over the years. I thought he was going to destroy me, turn me over to the police, divorce me and leave me with nothing. But he never said a word, I pointed out. Because he loved my son, she replied, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. The boy he raised from birth, the young man who calls him dad and carries his name. Theodore didn't want to destroy his world just to punish me, but he was willing to let me make that choice after he died. She nodded, miserably. He said you deserve to know the truth about us, that you deserve to decide what happened next. He said 8 years of watching us mistreat you had convinced him that you had better judgment and stronger morals than anyone else in the family. The irony was overwhelming. This woman who'd treated me like I was worthless had just confessed that her dying husband thought I was the most trustworthy person in the family. What happens now? She asked quietly, resigned to whatever punishment I chose to impose. I thought about Theodore's warning not to let power corrupt me, about my husband's innocent love for the father who'd raised him, about the victims of crimes that had gone unpunished because of police corruption. I thought about the $3 million that had been stolen from a business built through honest work. I'm going to give you the same kind of choice Theodore gave me, I said finally. She looked up, confused and hopeful. Option 1. I turn everything over to the authorities today. You go to prison for embezzlement, fraud, and accessory charges. Torino probably goes down too, along with everyone else in your corruption network. Your son learns that his entire identity is built on lies, and that the father he loved knew the truth but chose to protect him anyway. The family business gets tangled up in criminal proceedings for years, and everyone loses everything. She was crying harder now, but I continued. Option 2. You make things right. Every penny you stole gets returned to the business accounts with interest. You find a way to ensure that the criminals who escaped prosecution because of your tips face consequences for their crimes. You end all contact with Torino permanently. You treat me with the respect Theodore thought I deserved. And you live with the knowledge that I could expose everything at any moment if you slip back into your old ways. She stared at me through her tears. But what about the inheritance? What about your legal rights to everything? I'll keep what Theodore left me, I said. But I'm not going to use it to destroy your son's life. The money will go toward things Theodore would have approved of. Programs that actually help people instead of hurting them. And if I choose option 2, she asked, hope creeping into her voice, then your son never has to learn that the man who loved and raised him wasn't his biological father. The family business stays in the family, minus what you stole. And you get to spend whatever time you have left trying to become the person you should have been all along. She reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Why would you do this? Why not just destroy us and take everything? Because, I said, pulling my hands away gently. Unlike you, I understand the difference between justice and revenge. And because Theodore was right about one thing, power should be used to build people up, not tear them down. But I continued, my voice hardening. This isn't forgiveness. This is a business arrangement. You get one chance to make things right. If you ever treat me badly again, if you steal another penny, if you even look at me wrong at family dinners, I will burn your entire world down and not lose a minute of sleep over it. She nodded frantically, understanding that this was mercy with conditions attached. How long do I have? She asked. 6 months to return the money, 3 months to start treating me like family, and you have until tomorrow to decide which option you're choosing. That night, she called and agreed to option 2. The transformation that followed was remarkable and disturbing in equal measure. Over the next few weeks, my mother-in-law became the most attentive, respectful person I'd ever encountered. She called to ask my opinion on family matters. She invited me to lunch to discuss holiday planning. She even offered to help me decorate our apartment. My husband was amazed by the change, but attributed it to grief processing and guilt over how she treated me in the past. He was so happy to see his family finally accepting me that he never questioned why the transformation had been so sudden and complete. The money started appearing back in the business accounts through a complex series of transactions that my mother-in-law's accountant disguised as recovered assets and insurance payouts. Theodore's business manager was thrilled by the mysterious influx of capital, never suspecting it was stolen money being returned. More interestingly, several criminals who had previously escaped prosecution suddenly found themselves facing new charges. Drug dealers who'd avoided arrest for years were picked up in coordinated raids. Human traffickers who'd been untouchable were taken down by federal task forces. Violent felons who'd fled the jurisdiction were tracked down and brought to justice. I suspected my mother-in-law was using her connections with Torino to right some of the wrongs they'd committed together, but I never asked for details. I just watched the local news reports with grim satisfaction. 3 months after our coffee shop conversation, I received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 60s knocked on my door, introducing herself as Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos from Internal Affairs. I understand you might have information relevant to an ongoing investigation into police corruption, she said, showing me her badge. My heart raced. I'm not sure what you mean. She studied my face carefully. We've been building a case against Detective Torino for months. Recently, we've received anonymous tips that have helped us connect him to several serious crimes. Someone with detailed knowledge of his activities has been feeding us information. I maintained my composure. That's interesting, but I don't know anything about police business. She nodded. But you are related by marriage to the family that employed several businesses Torino was protecting, correct? I realized my mother-in-law was being smarter than I'd given her credit for. Instead of just ending her cooperation with Torino, she was actively helping law enforcement build a case against him. I can't help you, I said, but if you have evidence of corruption, I hope you pursue it. Santos left her card. If you ever remember anything that might be relevant, please call. A month later, Detective Torino was arrested on federal corruption charges. The news reports described a massive investigation involving dozens of law enforcement agencies. He was charged with taking bribes, interfering with investigations, and helping dangerous criminals evade justice. My husband watched the news coverage with interest. "I wonder if this is the same guy Mom dated before she met Dad," he said thoughtfully. My blood froze. "You knew about that?" He shrugged. "I found some old photos when I was helping Dad organize his office last year. Photos of Mom with some guy who looked like a cop. Dad said it was ancient history, from before they got serious. If only he knew how not ancient that history really was." The trial became a media sensation. Torino was convicted on 37 counts of corruption and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. During the proceedings, prosecutors mentioned anonymous tipsters who had provided crucial evidence, but they never identified the sources. My mother-in-law and I never discussed her role in bringing him down, but I knew she was responsible. She'd chosen to clean up her own mess rather than letting it fester. 6 months after our coffee shop meeting, she invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. "I wanted to thank you," she said as soon as I sat down. "For what?" "For giving me a chance to become someone better," she replied. "For showing me what real strength looks like." She explained that returning the stolen money had been surprisingly liberating. She no longer had to maintain complex lies about where their wealth had come from. She didn't have to worry about Theodore's ghost discovering new crimes. More importantly, helping law enforcement prosecute Torino and his criminal network had given her a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. "I started volunteering with a victims' rights organization," she said, "helping families who were hurt by the crimes I helped enable. It doesn't undo what I did, but it's something." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she seemed genuinely changed by the experience of choosing redemption over self-preservation. "What about your son?" I asked. "Do you ever think about telling him the truth?" Her expression grew sad. "Every day. But I've decided that secret isn't mine to tell anymore. Theodore left the decision about the family's future to you. If you think he should know, I'll tell him. If you think the truth would hurt him more than help him, I'll take it to my grave." It was a remarkable reversal. The woman who'd spent years treating me like an outsider was now acknowledging that I had the right to make decisions about the family's most important secrets. "I think some truths are too heavy for innocent people to carry," I said finally. "Your son is a good man who loves the father who raised him. That love doesn't become less real because of genetics." She nodded gratefully. "Theodore raised him to be better than both of us," she said. "Maybe that's what really matters." As we finished lunch, she made one more confession. "I need you to know that I tried to poison you that Friday morning," she said quietly. "I put ipecac in your food because I was terrified of what you'd learn at the will reading." "I know," I replied. "I found the empty bottle." She looked ashamed. "I've done a lot of terrible things, but trying to hurt you was the worst. You never deserved any of the treatment my family gave you. Theodore saw your worth when the rest of us were too selfish and stupid to recognize it." A year after Theodore's death, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The inheritance he'd left me was being used to fund literacy programs, support domestic violence shelters, and provide scholarships for students from low-income families. I'd also started my own nonprofit organization focused on helping families navigate complex medical situations. Theodore's final gift had given me the financial freedom to pursue work that actually mattered to me. My relationship with my husband's family had evolved into something I'd never thought possible. My mother-in-law included me in every major decision. My sister-in-law asked for my advice on raising her children. My brother-in-law invited me to join the family business as a consultant. Most importantly, they treated me with the respect I'd always deserved, but had never received. My husband noticed the changes, but never fully understood their scope. He was simply happy that his family had finally recognized what he'd seen in me from the beginning. One evening, as we sat on the porch of the Colorado property that had become a family retreat center, he asked me a question that I'd been dreading. "Something happened after Dad died, didn't it? Something that changed how everyone treats you?" I looked at this man I loved, who'd stood by me through 8 years of family cruelty, who deserved honesty but also deserved protection from truths that would devastate him. "Your father saw something in me that his family had missed," I said carefully. "He made sure I understood that I was valued, even when it didn't always feel that way." My husband nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. "Dad was a good judge of character," he said. "I'm glad his family finally listened to him. If only he knew how literally true that statement was." But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I would think about the power I still held in that safety deposit box. The ability to expose lies, reveal crimes, and destroy lives with a phone call to the right authorities. Theodore had been right about power and corruption. Having the ability to hurt people who'd wronged you was intoxicating. There were moments when I fantasized about revealing everything, about watching my husband's family face the consequences of their actions. But every time I was tempted by revenge, I remembered Theodore's final lesson. The real test of character isn't what you do when you have power over people who've wronged you. It's what you choose not to do. 2 years after Theodore's death, Detective Torino died in federal prison. The news reports mentioned that he'd been cooperating with ongoing investigations into police corruption networks, but they didn't go into details about what information he'd provided. My mother-in-law called me when she heard the news. "I thought you should know," she said quietly. "It's over now." She was right. The last connection to their criminal past was gone. The money had been returned. The victims had seen justice. The family had been transformed. Theodore's plan had worked better than he probably could have imagined. 3 years later, I received a letter from an unexpected source. It was from one of the families whose lives had been destroyed by crimes that Torino had helped enable. Their teenage daughter had been killed by a drug dealer who'd escaped arrest because of corrupt police warnings. "We wanted to thank you," the letter read, "for whatever you did to make sure the people responsible were finally held accountable. Our daughter's case was reopened because of new evidence, and her killer was finally convicted. We don't know who you are or how you were involved, but we know someone with a conscience helped bring justice for our family. I never responded to that letter, but I kept it in my safety deposit box next to Theodore's documents. A reminder that sometimes the hardest choices lead to outcomes we never could have predicted. At Christmas dinner that year, my mother-in-law stood up before dessert was served and raised her glass for a toast. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "To family. Real family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about the people who see our potential for goodness even when we can't see it ourselves. It's about second chances and the courage to become better than we were." She looked directly at me. Some of us took far too long to recognize the treasure we had among us. But better late than never. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, beaming with pride at what he saw as his family finally accepting me completely. After dinner, as I helped clear dishes in the kitchen, my mother-in-law pulled me aside for a private moment. "I want you to know that your mercy has been the greatest gift of my life," she said quietly. "You could have destroyed everything, but you chose to help us become better people instead." I nodded, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Theodore was right about power," I said. "It reveals who we really are when we have choices to make." She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been expecting for 3 years. "Do you ever regret not exposing everything? Not claiming the full inheritance that was legally yours?" I thought about it as I rinsed wine glasses. "No," I said finally. "I got something better than money or revenge. I got to prove to myself that I'm the person Theodore believed I was." 5 years after Theodore's death, my husband and I were finally able to start the family we'd always wanted. Our daughter was born healthy and perfect. And for the first time in our marriage, my mother-in-law was genuinely excited about becoming a grandmother. She threw us a baby shower that was everything I'd dreamed of but never expected. Beautiful decorations, thoughtful gifts, and a room full of people celebrating our growing family. As I opened presents surrounded by relatives who'd once treated me like an outsider, I thought about how dramatically our lives had changed. Theodore's final gift hadn't just been money or property. He'd given me the power to transform enemies into allies, to turn a dysfunctional family into something resembling healthy relationships. But the most important transformation had been internal. I'd learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending wrong never happened. It's about choosing to help people become better versions of themselves while protecting yourself from future harm. When our daughter took her first steps, my mother-in-law was there to cheer alongside us. When she spoke her first words, my sister-in-law recorded it on her phone to share with family members who couldn't be there. These people who'd once made me feel like I didn't belong now treated my child like the precious granddaughter and niece she was. My husband never learned the full truth about his paternity or his family's criminal history. Some secrets are too destructive to share, especially when the people involved have genuinely changed their behavior. But he did learn something important about the power of second chances and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. 10 years after Theodore's death, I received an invitation to speak at a conference for nonprofit leaders. The organizers had heard about the work I'd been doing with literacy programs and victim support services. During my presentation, I talked about the importance of using resources responsibly and the power of choosing mercy over revenge when dealing with people who've wronged you. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My family was one of the ones your programs helped," she said. "We were going through a really difficult time, and the literacy program gave my mom the skills she needed to get a better job. The scholarship fund helped me go to college. I just wanted to thank you for seeing our worth when nobody else did." I thought about Theodore's letter, about how he'd seen my worth when his own family couldn't, about how that recognition had given me the power to extend the same grace to others. That night, I called my mother-in-law to tell her about the conference. She listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the programs we'd funded and the lives we'd been able to change. "You know," she said when I finished, "Theodore would be proud of what you've built with his gift. You've honored his memory better than any of us could have." As I hung up the phone, I realized she was right. Theodore had given me more than money or property. He'd given me the chance to prove that power could be used for creation rather than destruction, for healing rather than harm. The safety deposit box still contained all the evidence of past crimes and family secrets. I visited it once a year, not to review the contents, but to remind myself of the choices I'd made and the person I'd chosen to become. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd chosen differently, if I'd exposed everything and claimed the full inheritance, if I'd used Theodore's evidence to destroy the people who'd treated me badly. But then I'd think about my daughter playing happily with her grandmother, about the literacy students who'd learned to read, about the families who'd received justice for crimes that might otherwise have gone unpunished. Theodore had been right about one final thing. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's helping them become the kind of people they should have been all along, while becoming the kind of person you were meant to be. My father-in-law's final gift hadn't just changed my life. It had changed all of our lives in ways none of us could have imagined when we sat in that lawyer's office 11 years ago. And every Sunday dinner, as I sit at the head of the family table surrounded by people who once treated me like I was worthless, I'm reminded that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose mercy over revenge, redemption over destruction, and hope over despair. That's the real inheritance Theodore left me. Not money or property, but the understanding that true power lies not in what you can destroy, but in what you can choose to build instead.